All right, welcome back, Camden Catholic. This is again Mr. Terry's Western Civ class, and we're going to finish up what we started today, which was the early phases of Greek time, right? Now, does anybody remember how many Greek time periods there are? That's a good answer, Luke. Good job. I heard you back there. 8. There's 8 Greek time periods, right? So we started off with the Neolithic era, and then we talked about how they started settling and stopped being nomadic, and they moved away from Paleolithic lifestyles with the inventions of farming and the domestication of animals. Then we talked about the early Bronze Age, which was the introduction of metallurgy and working with alloyed metals to create weapons, armor, tools as well. And then we talked about the Minoans, and we talked about the Palace of Gnosis and linear A writing, and we don't know how to decipher any of it, actually, but you know what, that's okay, because we're using what artifacts we have left to understand them as best we can. Now, we know that they were a seafaring people. They traded a lot with a bunch of different people, and it's really important that when you trade and you share traits through war and trade with different civilizations, that leads to, what was that word I told you in class? Anybody? Good job, EJ. That's right. We talked about cultural diffusion today. So the Minoans had a big hand in that. And we're going to kind of get into the Myceneans and where they came from. But let's keep going with the Minoans for like 2 seconds. But why did they end? Well, no one's certain why the Minoan civilization came to an end, but about 1400 BC, control of the Aegean Sea and trade routes off the coast of Crete passed into the hands of the new kingdom the new civilization called the Mycenaeans, all right? Now, a lot of you are wondering yourself, like, why are we calling them Minoans? Why Mycenaeans? Why not Greeks? We'll get to that, but don't fret. So just remember, Minoans were on Crete, and the Mycenaeans are on a mainland area called Peloponnese, and we'll talk about that in a second. So the Mycenaean period, from 1600 to 1100 BC. Where did these people come from? It's a really good question. The Mycenaeans came from the grasslands of southern Russia to settle on Peloponnese. Peloponnese is the large southern chunk of Greece. It's right down here. You see my cursor right here? Peloponnese is this area down here, okay? And we'll get into a little bit more geography when we talk about the Peloponnesian Wars between Sparta and Athens and the Delian League, all those things. So, now the Mycenaeans traded with the Minoans, learned a lot from them, actually worked pretty closely with them for some time. They stole their writing system from them, which was, they called theirs linear B, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But they came from the grasslands of southern Russia, which is actually right over here, and just moved down the the Thessalian plains and into the area known as Boeotia, and then is also called Peloponnese. So, now, Mycenaeans lived in peace with the Minoans until 1500 BC, when they attacked and destroyed them. Oh well. Now, that's what we believe. We don't know that for fact, but most historians agree that the reason why the Minoans fell is because the Mycenaeans destroyed them. Now, the Mycenaeans got into a point where they were literally trying to conquer large areas of land. Their very famous emperor, known as Agamemnon, was well known for doing these things. So, I'll show you some artifacts from him tomorrow. Now, right here, that's Mycenaea, okay? That's where their kingdom was, their central stronghold. And it's right here on the western chunk known as Peloponnese or Peloponnesus, okay? So, here we go. This is their writing. It's called linear B. It's derived from linear A, and it can also be, oh, whoops, that's supposed to say can't. All right, listen up. Can't be translated, okay? And this is what it looks like. Very, very similar to linear A, which was the Minoan writing system. So, Mycenaeans created a huge stronghold known as Mycenaea, all right? And the only way to get in or out was called the Lion's Gate, okay? So you can see the gate right here, and this is the headstone at the very, very top of it, and it looks like 2 lions preaching up towards a pillar. So, what does this tell us about them? What does having one entrance in and out and having these big stone walls tell us about the Mycenaeans? Kind of tells us that they were a very, very war-focused society. They were into protecting themselves and it was a stronghold, so they were actually trying to keep people out. Now, that tells us that they probably had defense and war on the mind, right? Now, this is what we believe Mycenaea looked like when it was built. So as you can see, it kind of reminds me as a historian of a medieval stronghold, right? So you have the Lion's Gate right here, and then large retaining walls, perfect for archers to sit on top of. And then you had the bottom part right here, probably normal living quarters for citizens, and then the agora, or the Greek marketplace. Now, they didn't call it an agora yet because technically they weren't Greeks, but we'll talk about that. And then you had the large temples up here. Now, this is going to influence heavily the way that Greek city-states were designed, but we'll talk about that after a while. So, that is Mycenaea at its height. So, here we go. Now, the Mycenaeans were known for one very, very famous, campaign of war in particular. Now, if I told you the Trojan War, what immediately comes to mind? Anybody? Good job over there. I heard you back there. Trojan Horse, right? You think about the Trojan Horse in Homer's Iliad, right? The Myceneans went to war with Troy, which is a city-state in what's present-day Turkey, so right next door. How about we jump back real quick, and I'll show you. There, where is it? Here we go. All right, so let's zoom in on this map real quick. All right, so Mycenaea was right here. Troy is right there. Now, this is present-day Turkey. So, if you were Mycenaea and Troy was over here, and we're both on the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean Sea and the Ionian Sea over here, what would be the main thing you fought over? Good answer, Nathan. You'd fight over trade routes, right? You'd fight over trade routes because that's how these people lived and survived. So let's jump back and finish talking about this. Now, because Troy was actually controlling a trade route unfairly and apparently taxing ships going from southern Russia to Greece. Now, the Mycenaeans would win eventually by burning down Troy and breaking through its walls. Now, there's a very famous story called the Iliad comes from this. That brings in the famous warrior Achilles, right? The guy that got shot in the ankle and died, and the very famous war campaign. Now, actually a good film if you'd like to go watch it. It's not the most historically accurate thing in the planet, but it's a romanticized version of Homer's Iliad. Is, of course, the movie Troy with Brad Pitt. Other quick thing about this whole shenanigans right here. Homer, what was odd about him? That's right, he was blind. Okay, he was a blind poet, and he was actually a wanderer, and he never actually wrote his stories down. So, the Iliad, about 500 years later, after the Trojan War, the blind poet Homer told the story. However, he didn't tell it exactly the way it happened. Of course, he introduced these new characters and made it much more of a romantic story that involved Hector, the Prince of Troy, and Paris, the other Prince of Troy, and stole the king of Sparta's wife, even though Sparta wasn't established yet. So, we don't think the Iliad's very accurate historically, but it's a really good example of literature through time, just like we talked about the Epic of Gilgamesh being the example of the first literature from Mesopotamia. So, right here, that's the famous symbol, of course, the Trojan horse, right? So, we'll keep going. This is what we actually believe, if the Trojan horse ever existed, what it could have looked like. Chances are it was never real, though. So, and here you go. Actually, this is a artist rendering of the burning of Troy, right? So the Mycenaeans burnt down Troy. Now, the Mycenaeans would be driven out of their homes by a group of barbarians called the Dorians, all right? The Dorians are going to begin to call themselves Hellenes. And in English, Hellenes translates to Greek, all right? So the Dorians are going to be the very first real deal Greeks. Now, when you think of mythology, when you think of Zeus and Poseidon and Aphrodite and Hephaestus and all those guys, the Dorians are the ones who came up with those stories. Okay, so the Dorians drove out the Mycenaeans, and they became the very first Greeks. Okay, now there was a little bit of a dip though. Okay, because what happened is the Greek Dark Ages. So this is so we talked about Neolithic era, right? Neolithic, early Bronze, Minoan, Mycenaean. This is the fifth time period, the Greek Dark Ages, all right? Now, this began a time of wandering and killing, and trade stopped. Many skills were forgotten, including how to read and write. Fresco painting was forgotten for quite some time, and working with ivory and gold was forgotten. So, a Dark Age is always it's a stalling of cultural advancement, and it goes hand in hand with a stopping of scientific advancement and a reversion backwards. So during the Greek Dark Ages, many people couldn't read or write or do much of anything anymore. They actually forgot most of those things. So the Greek Dark Ages began, and the only record we have of the Dark Ages is, of course, the blind poet Homer's stories. Now, we know that he was a part of the Dark Ages because he couldn't read because he was blind, obviously, and they didn't have Braille at the time, and he didn't write. So he actually told these all by word of mouth. Now, he wrote the Iliad and is considered the father of modern-day literature. Now, here we go again, though, okay? The people had to create a new civilization out of these Greek Dark Ages, beginning with herding and farming. Sparta and Athens are going to rise out of the ashes and start the archaic period of Greece, the one that we know most about today. So, we'll continue to talk about this stuff tomorrow. We'll get you caught up, and I will see y'all then. So I appreciate you watching this flip, and have a good evening, Camden Catholic.